So again, just want to welcome everybody to tonight's webinar from the National Weather Service in Boston Norton. This is our review of summer 2023, and we'll take a look at some of the climate statistics and some of the prevailing weather patterns, and give you a little bit of background as to why the weather became so active, especially from about July onward. And we'll also give the results of our forecast contest that many of you entered when we had our summer 2023 Outlook webinar. So we'll also get into a little bit of that. All right, so just to start, as a reminder, what is a normal summer? We get this question all the time, and normals are they're simply 30-year averages. So they include the year-to-year variations, which are all part of the climate cycle. And our current normal period is from 1991 to 2020. So those averages are going to change as the weather variations in those years that are covered change. So you're never really going to see a pure normal summer or a purely normal winter. That's pretty rare. You're always going to have some variation around that normal. And it's always important to remember our weather patterns tend to occur in cycles, usually lasting about several weeks at a time. So we certainly were in a pretty active period from about the middle of July into early part of September. Actually, into about the past week. It's quieted down a little bit now, and we'll just have to kind of see where it goes from there. But these global weather patterns that we talk about don't have a huge influence on our weather. We're more influenced by variations in, like, say, the polar jet stream or the subtropical jet stream. So again, our prevailing patterns tend to last several weeks at a time. And our rainfall, as you probably know, tends to be more localized in the summer. We have showers and thunderstorms. One part of your town could be wet, the other could be dry. So really not a lot of widespread rainfall, aside from anything tropical. That's kind of the exception. But for the most part, we look at more localized rainfall during the summertime. So our overview, this probably comes as no surprise to anybody, but temperatures ended up near normal, and that's over the 3 months of June, July, and August, which is the climatological months for summer. And we had above normal precipitation, and all of our climate sites, and even more, all the sites, fell within the top 12 wettest summers on record. So, not a record-setting wet summer, but certainly one that will be remembered, and all within the top 12. The pattern, as you probably can imagine, was quite active, especially from about the middle of July through the early part of September. We had many days of severe weather and flooding events, including tornadoes. That number was actually well above normal across southern New England, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And if you remember, the outlook for the summer from the Climate Prediction Center that we follow was chances were for above normal temperatures and above normal precipitation. So wasn't quite as warm, but certainly was on the wet side. So there seemed to be a better signal for wetter than average weather here in the Northeast. Okay, so we're going to start off with doing some of our polls here, and I'll get these up and running. Get a little bit of your feedback, keep this a little bit more interactive. So we'll start with the first question. And the first one was the overall wet summer with near normal temperatures kind of a surprise to you? And go ahead and answer that. I'll give you a few minutes. You can click on your response. At least from my vantage point, I thought it was going to be a little bit warmer, and it ended up being a little bit cooler than I expected, more, again, near normal. The wetness, yeah, not so much a surprise. We were in pretty much an active pattern most of the summer. So I'll let this go for a couple seconds, and then we'll show the results. So let's see. Yeah, odds are tilted more toward, yeah, it was a surprise, and I would agree with that. Give it another couple seconds here, and then we'll show the results. And it looks like we pretty much got our thing in here. So let's close that, and I will share that. Hopefully it will come out. There we go. So you can see 63% of you said yes, it was a surprise, and 37% said no. And yeah, I would agree with either one of you. Definitely the wet summer wasn't too much of a surprise. Maybe the temperatures were a little bit. So, all right, let's go to our next one. And our next question is, were the number of flash floods and tornadoes a surprise to you? That, might have been something that, we really weren't expecting. And you could say, yes, I wasn't expecting that much active weather, or no, pretty much what I thought we'd see. So let's see what we get on this one. And I think, for those of us at our office, it was a little bit of a surprise, not so much the flash floods, but certainly the tornadoes were a bit of a surprise seeing so many of them. But as we always say, the environments that favor flash floods also favor tornadoes. So This was certainly a good example of that over the summer. And it looks like, let's see, our responses are slowing down. So I will close this one and show you the results. And you can see a clear majority here, 95% yes. And I would be in that camp as well. I wasn't expecting that much active weather. So definitely, yeah, kind of unexpected there. We really were kind of busy for days at a time with all of the active weather. All right, so let's go to the last one. And this is more recent. This is more on Hurricane Lee. And, we're just kind of out of our own curiosity. Did the forecast for Hurricane Lee help you be prepared for the impact from the storm? Hopefully it was communicated that this was going to be a glancing blow. The storm would remain offshore, but it was so large, the wind field, that we would see some effects of it, primarily on Cape Cod and the islands and the coastal waters. So we'll let this go for a few seconds here, and hopefully, the messaging was clear enough, and everybody realized that it wasn't going to be a tremendous impact. Maybe I think we've had nor'easters that were certainly worse. And let's see. Wow, this one, okay. We're actually kind of unanimous on this one. This was 100% yes, so excellent. So that's really good for us to know. It's always a little more of a challenge when we have a storm with a name, a tropical system, because we go into a whole different set of rules with the tropical storm watches and warnings and everything else. So it's a different mode of operations for us at the office. And sometimes, the communication can be a little bit difficult, but I'm glad to see, and I know all of our partners, TV meteorologists also, were sending a pretty consistent message. So excellent. That's really good to know. Okay, so we're going to close that. And we'll move on at this point. Let's talk a little bit about the summer. So these two maps, Bill, and I credit Bill with all of these maps that you're going to see. This is the average heights at 500 millibars. So remember, that's our steering flow in the atmosphere. It's about 18,000 feet on the left. And on the right is the anomaly, or think about, how is it different from normal? So I think first what you see is an unusually deep trough over the eastern states, and you've got ridging out over the west. So it's kind of no surprise it was wet. Temperatures kind of near normal here in much of the east. If you remember all the stories about the excessive heat, especially on the desert southwest and into the plains, that's because of this persistent ridge that really was parked over that part of the country the whole summer as well. And on the anomalies, the blues and the purples over New England and the Northeast tells us it was a very unusual pattern. So this unusually deep trough really led to our wet and somewhat cool summer here in the Northeast, just very, very persistent. And if we look at down at the surface, so we're looking at surface pressure on the left, and this is kind of the composite for the whole summer, and the anomaly, again, the difference from kind of normal on the right. This is what we call MSLP, or mean sea level pressure. It's just essentially at the surface. Notice you've got kind of that trough pattern again, almost like you can imagine as kind of a cold front stuck in this area. And there certainly were a large number of fronts and surface lows that moved through the area. Well, out in the west, you had more of high pressure, bringing that hot and dry weather out in the Rockies to the plain states. So again, you can see in the anomalies that pretty much well below average here, with the purples and the blues here in the east, and a little bit above average out when you get toward the Rockies. So again, lower than normal pressures. That tells you you've got a lot of low pressure systems, maybe a lot of cold fronts and things like that, to bring us kind of that unsettled weather pattern. Now, if we go month by month, you actually see how the anomalies kind of work out. Both on the left is our 500 millibar anomaly. On the right is our sea level pressure or surface anomaly. And you can see in June for the month, certainly the core was pretty much right along the East Coast. There was a little bit of ridging to our north and another trough out in the West Coast, and a lot of low pressure here at the surface as well. Fast forwarding into July, notice now the ridge of high pressure goes kind of into the Maritimes to our east, and the center of the trough is now more across the Great Lakes. And what that does, that's when we got a little bit more active. That gives us, if you can imagine, kind of a counterclockwise flow. That gives us that southerly flow up the coast. There's our tropical moisture. There's our showers and thunderstorms. There's our tornadoes from all of that. So this pattern is pretty favorable for heavy rain, as well as some severe weather. And again, the surface pressures are kind of below average here throughout the month of July. And August, not much of a change. The center of the anomaly kind of shifts toward northern New England at that point, but kind of a continuation of the same weather pattern, fairly active with showers and thunderstorms, flash floods, severe weather. And you can see certainly above average heights across much of the west and the southern plains, which is where the heat was kind of limited to for much of the summer. All right, so we're going to take a look at some of our, what was our warning counts look like and how did it compare to other years? Well, the flash flood warnings up to about this week, we issued a total of 73, and that you can see up at the top is kind of the most we've issued, in recent memory. This goes back to about 1989, it looks like. It's not always a measure of how active it was, but it's certainly a measure of how much we were warning. So certainly, in other years we're clustered kind of low, maybe 10, 20 or so. And in more active years, the wetter years, you can see we're up over 30 or 40. And certainly more advances now in technology would lead us to issuing more of these warnings. We have better rainfall estimates from the radar. We have better spotter networks. We have your reports. We have people's home weather stations reporting online. So we have a lot more data that we can put into the warning decision-making process. So you'll notice, a lot of these were not only 1998 was a wet year, 96 was a wet year, but also, more recent years, thanks to these advances in technology. Certainly you can see down some of the dry years as well kind of stand out. 1999 was a drought year before we had Tropical Storm Floyd move through. And, certainly some of the years in the 2000s were dry as well. But overall, this was certainly, kind of the highest year the most flash flood warnings that we've issued as an office. Now, if we look at the severe thunderstorm and tornado warnings, you can see it's kind of middle of the pack, maybe a little bit above, kind of right about here at 109. The 2008 season was extraordinarily active. We had nearly 300 that season. But for the most part, you can see we're clustered fairly well between maybe about 75 and 150 warnings per, severe weather season. Certainly there were some lean years in here. And, again, advances in technology, we're going to be issuing more warnings. The Doppler radar, the dual pole products that we have help us out quite a bit. So you can see a lot more of the recent years, especially past 2012, are some of the higher numbers, whereas the 1980s, 1990s, certainly more limits in technology and reporting. So fewer warnings would be issued there. But kind of a neat way just to kind of look at a season from our vantage point of, how many warnings are we issuing and, as opposed to events. And we'll take a look at the events as well. So annually, these are the number of severe weather days going back to 2004. And you can see this year we actually had 23 days where there was severe weather, at least somewhere in Connecticut, Mass, or Rhode Island in our kind of coverage area. The average over that same time period is 25. So we're pretty much in an average severe weather year, believe it or not. Last year was a little bit less, even with the drought going on. 2020, 2021 were a little bit more active, but you can see for the most part, we're right around that 25 days per summer where we actually have severe weather happening somewhere in our area. So kind of an average from that perspective. It doesn't talk about what kind of severe weather, just whether we had any reports of storm damage. Now, if we look at the number of tornado days, this will stand out, a little bit here. Certainly the average, again, 2004 to 2022 is 2 days. So you can see for the most part, there's a handful thrown in over the 2000s, 2010s. I think many of you remember 2018 was a fairly active year. We had a number of tornadoes even into like October. 2021 was active from a tropical standpoint. We had a number of tropical remnant weak EF0 tornadoes, especially in Massachusetts. And then this year we had 5 tornado days. So probably, one of our more active seasons for tornadoes, certainly over the past, say, 20 years. Now, if we look at the different types of severe weather hail reports, you can see the average annual number of hail reports. This is 3/4 inch or larger per state. And this goes back, Bill ran the stats to 1993. And you can see Massachusetts has 43 number of hail reports, Connecticut 19, Rhode Island has the least. And I think that makes sense with the proximity to the water, the stabilizing influence of the ocean. The max reports back in 2008 and 2009. So 153 reports in Massachusetts, and this includes the entire state, not just our coverage area. Connecticut was 69 in 2009, and Rhode Island had 19 in 2008. So I think you remember 2008 was a fairly active, severe year as well. And our records for largest hailstones, Massachusetts had a 4-inch one in the Berkshires. That was on June 1st of 2011, the day of the tornadoes. Connecticut, you go back to either June 20th of 1995 or May 29th of 1969, 2 3/4 inch, and the same for Rhode Island, 2 3/4 inch, back on June 30th of 1998. So hail is certainly a little less common here but it certainly can still occur. And then we look at reports of wind damage per state. And the average, as you can see, is for all three states is 190, with the most in Massachusetts, a little more real estate, followed by Connecticut, and then the least for Rhode Island. Again, part of it is the small size of the state, but also the stabilizing influence of the ocean. Our max years looks to be about 2010 for Connecticut and 2016 elsewhere. And remember, this is going to be more recent just because we have more spotters, more ways to report, social media. We hear about more severe weather reports. So these are going to largely outweigh the reports that were gathered back in the 1980s, 1990s, even the early 2000s with the advent of technology. Really helps, give us more reports. So just looking at tornadoes now, this is the total number. So we're not talking about year by year, but this goes back to 1950 when modern record keeping began for tornadoes. And you can see for southern New England, again, that includes Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, our peak month is July, followed by August. I think that's pretty well known. We have the most thunderstorm days then, and it's usually a little bit still some jet stream energy to help really help these tornadoes really form. But can it be early as May? Really, May through August are kind of the peak months. But it's not unusual to have a fall peak as well. And even into the winter, we can have an occasional tornado. I think many will remember 2017 in Conway, Massachusetts in February. That was certainly an unusual event. And in the total number, if we're looking at the season, so winter, spring, summer, and fall, no surprise, it's summer. But there's actually a fall peak as well, September, October, November. So that's something to always keep in mind as we go into the fall. As the jet stream starts to strengthen for the winter, you just need a little bit of instability, and that can sometimes help tornadoes form as well. And we saw that one back in 2021. So by month, just looking by state, you'll see fairly similar pattern here. Peak for Connecticut is in July. There were 36 during that entire stretch. For Rhode Island, the peak was August, and some of those are tropical related for sure. But again, smaller state, you're going to definitely have fewer events. And for Massachusetts, the peak is July, followed by August, and even a little bit of a peak there into the fall as well. That's certainly not completely ruled out as we get into September, October, and even November. So looking at the total number of thunderstorm wind reports and hail reports, you can see those as well. And our peak, obviously, is the summer months, but there are, at least a number of reports scattered throughout the year. Peak is June, July, and August, which is our summer, but can be early as May and even into September or October in some cases, especially with respect to the wind damage reports. So these go back to 1955 for the record database. Okay, so now we'll talk about a little bit about what's normal and talk about how this year kind of compared. So these are from the Storm Prediction Center, and you can see the average number of tornadoes per state. This goes back to 1993. It's 2 in Massachusetts and Connecticut, and really none in Rhode Island. The fatalities, fortunately, are 0 as well. So this past year, we actually had 2 in Connecticut, which is pretty much the average. We had 8 in Massachusetts, which is about 4 times the normal, and 4 in Rhode Island, which is over 4 times as well. So certainly was an active year when compared to normal, especially in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. It seemed like a lot of the storms and the heavy rain really favored Rhode Island and southeast Massachusetts during this summer. So in 2023, and we'll say so far because we're only through about the middle of September, these are looking at the tracks of the 14 tornadoes that we had verified. There were 8 in Massachusetts, 2 of them in Connecticut, including one not shown. It's actually 3. There's an EF0 in Roxbury, Connecticut, out in the western part of the state, Litchfield County, and 4 in Rhode Island. I think most notable, this would be the Situate to North Attleboro tornado, and this would have been the North Attleboro to Mansfield tornado. Those were kind of the most notable. But even one, we remember Mattapoisett, one in Bourne, and even one in West Brookfield earlier in the season. But you can really see the corridor really lines up. Eastern Connecticut across northern Rhode Island and into southeast Massachusetts was kind of the storm corridor for this past summer. And that's also the same area we saw a lot of flash flooding, including the Providence, Cranston area, Johnston area, even in the South Shore communities south of Boston as well. Really got hard hit with flash flooding this summer. But that's a look at the 14 so far. And at this point, we'll have to see if we have to add any more to the list. But that's certainly enough in my book. So just a reminder, the tornado environments pretty much follow what we looked at with those closed lows. If you remember, And you can go back and look at our Southern New England tornado webinar on YouTube. Most of our events occur with some sort of closed low here in Southern Ontario or in the Great Lakes or even over New England. That's our most dominant tornado environment. And that certainly was the most dominant weather pattern through the summer, as we showed you, with those kind of anomalies showing, especially, in parts of July here where the anomaly was centered right over Southern Ontario. So again, this is our most dominant tornado setup. So really kind of no surprise if there were closed lows kind of hanging around somewhere around the Great Lakes or Southern Canada, that we had a number of tornado events right through the summer. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about some of the climate statistics here. And again, we're talking about the months of June, July, and August. You may have seen some of these on social media, but we'll show them again just for completeness here. For Boston on the left, you can see our average temperature was slightly below normal at 71 degrees, and that takes into account the daily highs and lows. Kind of, just a nudge below normal. Our precipitation was almost double, and it was the second wettest summer in station history for Boston, going back to the late 1800s. And you can see how it compares to normal. The brown line is the normal rainfall for the summer, and the green is each observed rainfall event stepping up and up. And you can see by the time we got into the middle of July, we really started to take off as far as getting well above normal. And by the end, again, nearly 10 inches above normal for the summer. And a similar pattern in Worcester as well. Just starting off with the rainfall, you can see we were pretty much close to normal, maybe even a touch below heading into the summer. And then we got into really the early and mid part of July, and the heavy rainfall out in central Massachusetts really showed up there. The total in Worcester was nearly 23 inches. And that's the second wettest summer in station history as well, almost double the normal precipitation at Worcester Airport. And you can see temperatures were a little bit above average, just slightly above at this point for Worcester. So a little bit warmer and wetter across the interior, a little bit cooler and wetter closer to the coast for Massachusetts. And then moving on to Hartford. Hartford shows a similar signal to Worcester in that really started off a little bit below average going into the start of June. And then we took off with those rainfall events into July and August. The mean temperature was just above average, just a tick above at 72.1. And the rainfall was a good almost 7 inches above normal. That was the 10th wettest summer in station history. So not quite as much of a record setter as at Boston and Worcester, but still within the top 10 of wet summers. And for Providence, again, a similar trend, below average rainfall going to early June and July, and then the wet weather really took over from that point on. The total was just over 16 inches, which was the 12th wettest summer in station history. And temperatures edged a little bit below average for the summer in Rhode Island. That was kind of true as well with eastern Massachusetts. So again, the coastal area is a little bit below average as far as temperature. The interior areas maybe a little bit above or just close to normal. And everywhere across the board was wetter than average. So you can see some of the statistics there. So some other interesting climate facts that we can look at on the left, the number of days of measurable rainfall. So that's when there was 1/100th of an inch or more. And this is for June, July, and August. The normal number of days for Boston is 29. There were actually 38, which ties for the sixth greatest number of days. And the record was actually 46, so not too far away from that. For Hartford, there were 33 days of measurable rainfall. The normal is 33. The ranking this year was 38, which is 12th on record, and the record number was 47. For Providence, the normal number of days is 29, similar to Boston, and there were 37 days, which ties for 12th, the most being 44 in 1927, which is an older record. And for Worcester, an average of 33. There were 42 this past summer, and pretty close to the record. It was 7th on record, but closer to that record of 47, which was set most recently in 2009. And the other side of the coin were the least number of 90-degree or warmer days. And remember, this is just the summer, so we did have some earlier in May. We actually had some after August and September. Those don't count as far as the summer climatology, but they will count for the annual. And you can see, all across the board, well below average. Boston only had 4. Hartford only had 10. Providence and Worcester had none, which ties the record lowest, which occurs in a number of years. And you can see the normals here range from 3 at Worcester up to as many as 17 at Hartford. So certainly, below average number of 90-degree days. And that was, we'll talk about in our forecast contest, that was one of the things that we asked you to do. So again, wet and cool was kind of the way to go, and definitely a very, very low number of 90 or warmer degree highs for the summer months. So just looking at precipitation now for the year so far, you can see we're in pretty good shape as far as drought is concerned. There are no areas in southern New England that are, at least even in the D0 or the abnormally dry conditions. You can see we started the year pretty much close to normal. Some areas even a little bit above. So again, we're looking at Boston on the top left, Providence top right, Hartford lower left, and Worcester lower right. So this gives us an area, a good sample of the coast on the top and the inland areas on the lower part. And you can see, again, we're pretty much running close to average as we headed up into summer. And then once we got really into July, that's when we took off, and we're well above average. So going into the fall, we're in pretty good shape as far as rainfall deficits. We're all above average at this point. So that's very good for water supply. I'm guessing there haven't been very many water bans, if at all, other than the typical voluntary ones, which is good news. So we're really in good shape as we're heading into the fall and the winter as far as water supply across Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And how about that forecast contest? Well, these are the winners that we came up with. For Boston, again, you can see the observed number of 90-degree days here at the bottom. Our friend Sean won the contest for Boston with a forecast of 10. You can see everybody was well above, but that's okay. We were too at the office. For Bradley, we had Ed, who came in with 11 and missed it by just 1, which is a great forecast. Looks like Tom at 14 was also pretty close. Others were a little bit higher. Again, I think most of us were skewed a little bit high. For Worcester, again, Ed won there with 2. There was one 90-degree day in Worcester, and a number of you had 4, which is a good forecast, so not too off there. For Providence, we didn't have any, and the lowest were 9, so by Sean and Ed. So Sean and Ed, congratulations. You did a great job on the 90-plus days. For Nantucket on July 4th, the high was 75, so a couple of good forecasts there from Tom and from Liz. A couple degrees either side of that. Looks like Ed wasn't too far off either. We just never really got into the heat that day. And then for the office, our office in Norton, our highest temperature for the summer was 90 on July 7th. That was it. So our winner there is Joe. He had 95. He was the lowest. We had a number there we had an 81 from Ed. That wasn't too far off, but a number of you in the high 90s and even into 100. So congratulations to all the winners. A great contest we did. And when we do our winter outlook in late October or November, we will also do our winter forecast contest. So we'll be looking at snowfall and probably a forecast high for one location on New Year's Day. That's what we like to do. So again, congratulations to thank you to all of you for entering. We appreciate it. I hope it was a little bit of fun. But yeah, definitely cooler, I think, than all of us anticipated. All right. So with that, that will wrap up our summer review for 2023. And at this point, I'll pause here. We'll answer some questions, and then we'll get on to our weather briefing here tonight. So let's see. Questions from, looks like Matthew has a question. Do you think that October will turn out cooler and drier, or do you think it will stay warm and wet? We'll get to that as we go through the weather briefing here. The odds are kind of favoring warmer than average temperatures, at least slightly as we head into the fall. It's kind of a toss-up as opposed to whether we're going to go dry or wet. But we'll show the Climate Prediction Center outlooks for that in a few minutes. Another question from Matt, was the July pattern shown on the 500 millbar height anomaly map and negative NAO? Yeah, when you have the ridging over the Maritimes there, the high pressure, that's kind of a block. So you have, that's definitely the negative NAO pattern. So good observation. I know that's one for the snow lovers in the audience you want to see in the wintertime. So we'll have to see if that comes to fruition. That really helps us lock in the cold and usually the storminess too. So we'll see. And let's see, he also notes, interesting how Worcester and Boston got more rain this summer than snow last winter. Yeah, definitely. It turned wet, I think, just without the cold air in place over the winter. So unfortunately, yeah, it was, just a wet summer. We'll see how the winter turns out, whether this pattern can continue or if we tend to dry out a little bit. We'll see. From Sebastian, let's see, on the mean 500 millibar height anomaly graphic you showed for the duration of the summer, noticed there's a strong positive anomaly over the Canadian Maritimes. Do you think that could have led to the more stagnant pattern that was observed throughout the majority of the summer? Yeah, absolutely. Let me see. Can I quick back to that? Yeah, let me go back just to show you guys. Because that's a good point. That's something that you want to look at. Let me go back to the mean for the whole summer. Here we go, and I'll show that right now. So you can see, yeah, definitely. You've got this area of negative anomalies over us. But to the north, look at the positive. That means you've got a lot of ridging up there. And as we know, the ridging can act as a block. So whenever you have that block to our north, you're going to ensure that, systems coming either out through the Great Lakes or up the East Coast, think winter, those will get blocked and be tucked in more toward the coast instead of being able to escape offshore. So yeah, absolutely. That's a classic blocking pattern. Usually don't see it in the summer months. It's usually more typical of the winters. So, but that's certainly a reason behind why it was so wet and relatively cool over this past summer. All right. Well, I do not see any other questions at this point. So right here, we will pause for 1 minute